Welcome, everybody. We are really excited about this track for a number of reasons. One, we've been talking about this for probably over a year about getting a track together of operational professionals and GIS professionals and bring them together and um, talk around certain things that the SICE GIS committee and the SICE working group have been working on for a long time. So uh, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, just real quick, what you're going to see today is a couple of speakers. One, Kent Kildow, is going to provide opening comments. Kent is the Director of Business Continuity and Emergency Management for Verizon. Ken has been chair of the SICE, or the Sensitive Information Sharing Environment, the SICE work group, which gave birth to the GIS committee, our GIS work group, chaired by Carrie Hicks from Duke and Chris McIntosh. So Carrie is a GIS data analyst at Duke Energy. She's been in the business for about 7 years. She has a unique set of skills to identify opportunities where GIS and things can make things more effective. She graduated from Ball State University with a double major in atmospheric science and GIS. In addition to graduating cum laude, congrats, Carrie. She earned several other awards, including the Cooper Science Award for Academic Excellence in Science. The other co-chair of the GIS committee is Chris McIntosh. Chris brings to the table experience from government and industry. In government, he served in Virginia as the Commonwealth's interoperability officer. And he also served as the operations chief at Virginia Emergency Management. From there he went on to work at Esri. And at Esri, he was the director of public safety industries, which was GIS, largest GIS company in the world. Chris has a bachelor's degree in history from Pennsylvania State University and a master's in Homeland Security and Emergency Management from Virginia Commonwealth University. And Chris is the co-chair of the GIS work group. So really excited you all are attending this. The idea for this effort is really to help operations people to make calls and decisions in with GIS folks to learn about a new standard that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Today. I'm sorry, I got my tracks mixed up. So I'm going to let Carrie take it over from here, but this is a way for us to increase confidence in data so that when I share data with you, we're working off the same standard. We know I'm calling it reliable and you know what that means. And so you'll hear about it in just a minute. So Carrie, let me turn it over to you and we can get started.
All right, thank you, Tom. I think that Kent is going to do.
I'm sorry.
Some opening comments. I'm going to turn it over to Kent.
No, you know what? I'm like running a wedding here. So I'm looking at the, I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. So Ken, thank you. Ken is the chair of the SICE work group. And he's provided tremendous leadership for a number of use case initiatives. So Ken, thank you for being on here. And if you kick us off, I'd appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Real happy to be here this afternoon and just excited to allow Carrie and Chris to share this body of work with the team. One of the principles that we work on for the SICE is how do we operationalize data? How can you bring data together to make better decisions during an emergency response so you can mitigate impact, and if there has been impact, return to business as usual as quickly as possible. For myself, I think of in terms of customers. I know many of you are going to think about constituents if you're in a government organization, but being able to get everyone back to their normal life as quickly as possible is what we're focused on. Oftentimes that requires bringing together diverse sets of data, some which you may be very familiar with, but in some cases, data sets that you may be less familiar with, so you can understand what is happening operationally and then make decisions to affect your either impact or assessment, or more importantly, your response to help your constituents. This body of work really helps us take a look at how you can look at and consider the value of the data sets that you may be using as you affect your response. As I said, some may be extremely familiar to you, others may be a little less familiar, and you want to understand the value of the data and how much importance you should put on it when you make your decisions. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Carrie and Chris for real this time. You know, once again, I think you'll see the value of this work, a great effort by this team and really being well received by a very broad spectrum of users. So Chris, Carrie, I'll hand it off to you.
Want to take it over, Chris?
Sure. And you're going to share your screen, Carrie, if you put those slides up. As Kent said, the ORLs serve multiple purposes. The statistics show there are literally tens of thousands of data services available to a geospatial user, whether it's through services that are public or services through providers such as Esri, or through premium content, what we call premium content service providers, such as a weather provider or a power outage provider, or whoever. Traffic is another good example. There's actually a whole market around data. It's now a commodity that is created, bought, and sold. During a disaster, statistics show that data availability increases about 400%, because a lot of things that people weren't willing to share or wanted you to pay for become available for free. So how do you know what to do with that data? How do you know, if you're a GIS professional, whether that data is refreshed, has a refresh rate that's suitable for your needs, is updated with any periodicity, is stable, has simple things like contact information. So if something's wrong with it, you know who to call. How do you know? And the other side of that is, how do you know, if you're a decision maker, what you're looking at? Is this authoritative and as absolute truth data? Or is this crowdsourced data that maybe isn't absolutely perfect, but is good for providing context, or is the best that you have? Social media derived information is a good example of something like that. So,
Chris, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So Tom, would you mind sharing the slides, actually? Sorry.
I can do it.
You just,
Okay.
Let me just share these real quick.
You got it, Chris? Okay.
I got it. Everybody see that? So what we're talking about here is you have all of these types of data sets coming from electric, weather, transportation, fuel, lodging.
Chris, can you zoom in? It's pretty tiny.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe not. We are definitely PowerPoint.
Yeah, you may have to just go into presentation mode, maybe.
Yeah, it won't let me. For some reason. Oh, I know why. Apologies. We're gonna share a different screen. How's that?
Much better.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we have all this data that's coming from all these different places. There was no place for letting both technologists and decision makers understand with any commonality what they're looking at. I kind of hearken it back to my days as an interoperability coordinator, where we got rid of 10 codes because the 10 codes were different in different locations. And we said, use plain language. That way everybody knew what everybody else was talking about. The same thing here with the ORLs. The ORLs provide a framework for common understanding of data. And what Carrie's going to show you is how that is derived. So when you are looking at data and you can use this algorithm that's been developed to decide, is this an ORL1, which is the best, or 4, which is, well, best is the wrong word. ORL1, which would be what we would call authoritative, or 4, which is kind of use at your own risk. And then you can make an informed decision about whether or not to use that for your decision support tools. It's really revolutionary because in the past, there are many, many stories of and anecdotes where bad data or misunderstood data has gotten into a decision tree and been used for either ways that it wasn't intended in one of the best case scenarios, or worst case scenarios has driven bad decisions or misinformed decisions that affected lives and property. So the ORLs provide us that ability to try and prevent that from happening in this data rich world that we live in today. So Carrie, with that, yeah, Tom.
Chris, just a comment. The operational readiness level came out of two incidences. One, we got great data from a university. This is awesome. Is it ready for decision making? Well, no, we need about we need about 2 more years. I'm like, well, why are we sharing this, right? So we had this issue all the time in the fleet work group. So Carrie, working with Karen Moe and a few folks, worked with ESIP and NASA, and we borrowed NASA's operational readiness level process and kind of dumbed it down to 4 steps. And it really fit very well. So we didn't invent this. The ORL is something NASA's been using. We just simplified it for 4, but it solved the operational problem. Is the data I'm looking at ready for me to make a decision, or I could spend in the electric sector $100,000 a day pre-positioning crews or more, right? So it was giving confidence factor to the data for those of you that are new. And there's a website, there's a webinar, but I just want to give the backstory, Chris, so people know how do we get here. It was really thanks to our partnership with NASA and the ESIP Federation and getting data we didn't know was not really usable at the time. Good people, but anyway, I just want to share that as we jump into this.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic to not start from scratch, to use the great work of that went before. So thank you to the ESIP Federation and Karen and those folks. So with that, that's that's kind of the foundation and the framework there that the ORLs are based on, and the goal of the ORL framework. With the All Hazards Consortium, we continue to work on expanding that and getting more and more data sets graded against the ORL framework. And Carrie's going to show you how we do that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Carrie, turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. All right, so I'm going to be building on some of what Chris, Kent, and Tom have already talked about. So what I really want to do is present a scenario to you all that really, I think, drives home a situation where a model like this becomes extremely important. And this is actually a scenario that happened in real life. It happened to me. So it's a personal story. I hope that it kind of brings it all together for everybody. Then we're going to dive into kind of a model overview and the philosophy behind the operational readiness levels and how we got here, and a little bit of the why. So why is this important? Why do we need to be thinking about this? I'm going to dive a little bit into the logic of the model itself and some of the criteria that we landed on, and show you some example data sets of some information that we've already ranked. So starting off with a scenario. So imagine that you are a GIS analyst or a GIS professional, and you're working to support hurricane response for your company or your organization. So you help support a web application that provides situational awareness for higher up decision makers within your company. And a request has come to your desk, which is to find live data on gas availability at gas stations and add it to your application. Our crews are getting bottlenecked by evacuating citizens, and gas stations are beginning to run out of gas. So you know that you have to provide this data really quickly because you're trying to move crews into a very hard hit area, but you're just not able to find gas stations that have gas. So you do some research, and within a few minutes, you come across an ArcGIS REST service that displays gas buddy data. And if you haven't heard of Gas Buddy, it's an application that allows you to see nearby gas stations, see the cost of gas, whether they're open or closed, et cetera. So you grab that REST endpoint and you add it to your application. Decision makers then take that data and they start to use it to inform their routing decisions as they bring in crews from surrounding regions. So then imagine that you're the decision maker in this process. You finally have that gas station data and you begin informing your colleagues that the data is available within the app. And as this always happens, within minutes, 50 people or more have viewed the data. They're starting to use it to inform their response efforts. So at first pass, this sounds like a win, right? I think I skipped something. Yeah. So in this case, it was a win, but it was also a close call. So after that dust cleared, that GIS analyst, which was me in this story, went back and assessed the Gas Buddy service and discovered a few things. First of all, there was no metadata really provided with the service. If you go to the endpoint, it didn't really give you any information about where the data was coming from, how often it was being updated, nothing like that. It was unknown who the data facilitator was. So in ArcGIS Online, you can go and you can look at the person's account who's hosting data. In this case, it was not Gas Buddy. So it was a third-party data facilitator, which happens all the time. You hear about NowCoast. Well, NowCoast is a third-party facilitator that uses data from NOAA or the National Weather Service. Very common. But in this case, it wasn't clear who that data facilitator was. And in addition, there was no information about how often that service was actually being updated. So it turns out that this service was not being updated. It was a snapshot in time that showed open gas stations and whether or not they had gas, which was really, really helpful right at the beginning of the hurricane, right? But after a day or two, that data becomes really out of date. Okay, so that previous scenario happens probably more frequently than you might think, and it can have some pretty major implications for disaster response situations, but also just regular operational situations as well. So had the decision makers referenced the Gas Buddy data a week later, they would have been using really old data, which could at best have delayed response, but at worst, it could have caused a major incident. So the operational readiness levels model was created to mitigate this type of situation. So the ORL model is a tool that allows us to translate the operational readiness of a data set from the technical data characteristics into an easy to understand standardized ranking. The data sets are ranked between 1, which is the highest level of operational reliability, to 4, which is the lowest level of operational reliability. And you can see on the right there a breakdown of the 4 ORL levels and kind of a description of what each one means. The GIS analyst can quickly rank the data set using preset criteria, which I'll get into here in a minute. When they pass that data along to a decision maker, that person immediately understands the reliability of the data set. So they go into their decision-making situation already knowing how much they can rely on that data set and what the limitations are. And they don't have to sort through any technical details to arrive at that conclusion. And this is maybe one of the most important things. So as that data gets passed along to other decision makers, that ranking travels with it. So imagine, in order to achieve that now without something like this, I would have to explain to every person who might be using the data set, hey, like this is just a snapshot in time. You need to understand the limitations of the data that you're looking at. Here's how often it's updated, et cetera. With the ORL ranking, they immediately can recognize the limitations of the data and how reliable it is. So the power of the model is in the immediate recognition of data set reliability and its shortcomings. So what this really lends to is decision makers being able to make better data-driven decisions, and hopefully for data providers to provide better data too. So let me move this window. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why this idea came about and what we really get to benefit from it. So for GIS professionals, I have a couple of bullet points here. The first one is really that built-in questioning attitude when discovering new data sets. Again, looking back on our scenario, Many of us know what it feels like to be in that crunch situation where you have somebody who's begging for data as quickly as you can find it. And a lot of times, if you're a decision maker, you don't even want to care about whether it's good data. Sometimes data is better than no data, even if it's not good data. In the mindset of a person in that situation, you just want something to go on. So that's an understandable feeling, but it's also potentially dangerous because sometimes bad data can be worse than no data. So what this does is it kind of incorporates that built-in questioning attitude. So in our scenario, if we had a process like the ORL model in place, there would have been that pause that would have happened, right? Where you think, okay, there's missing metadata. I'm asking questions about this data. I'm realizing that maybe this isn't the right information to use. Or if it is, I need to make sure I communicate the limitations. So the built-in questioning attitude is really important. The second is the standardization of process and the communication of that data set reliability. Again, just being able to know exactly what that process is when you discover the data set all the way to the ranking. It's really helpful for reliability to have that set process in place. And lastly, this really reduces liability risk on the part of the analyst or the GIS organization. When you were passing data on to someone to use to make decisions and that data is bad, even if it's not your data, you still provided the data to someone. If something bad happens, that could come back on you. So incorporating, again, that built-in questioning attitude in this process helps as a stopgap to make sure that that doesn't happen, first of all, and that it doesn't come back on you as a GIS professional. On the side of the operational or decision maker, the ORL model provides a simplified and really rapid understanding of data reliability. Again, you don't have to look through technical details about the data, which you don't really have time to do anyway. So just being able to look at, okay, this is an ORL1. I know I can trust this data. I know what that means is incredibly powerful for a decision maker. Secondly, it leads to improved safety and efficiency resulting from that reduced risk. And then it just helps the decision maker make more informed decisions. So knowing the background and the reliability of that data going into making the decision, it's just going to make those decisions better overall. You might have, we might see a cat walk through the screen here. So pardon me, they cannot be trained. All right, so what I want to show now is kind of the general logical structure of the ORL model as a decision tree. So I'm going to click present and move my guy again here. So the way this works is you start at the top left of this decision tree. And what you're doing is you're essentially asking simple yes or no questions about the data. And if you answer yes, you move down. If you answer no, you move to the right. And each time you move to the right, you're basically going down a ranking. So if you answer yes to everything, you're going to end up at a data set that is an ORL level of 1, which I'll just say right off the bat, data sets that end up as an ORL 1 are very rare. Honestly, very few of the data sets that we've come across end up being at this ranking. But that's okay. I think that shows that there's just a lot of room to grow for a lot of this data to provide more information. So if I zoom in.
Hey, I was going to say, Carrie, play. Thank you. Zoom in, please. Thanks. Great.
Yes. So the first question is whether or not the data comes from a trusted and vetted source. And this one is really important because if you don't know the source of the data, really you shouldn't use it at all. And it's not qualified to be ranked on the ORL model. So you'll see that if the answer is no, you're going to get bumped over to not ranked. And the reason for that is if you can't verify where the data comes from, none of this other stuff really matters, right? Because that is the most critical, important piece of information to have about data. So again, if you answer no, that's going to get you bumped out. And this is kind of the situation that I would have been in with the Gas Buddy data. That data really shouldn't have been used. It shouldn't have been ranked at all. If it had said in the metadata, this data is not being updated, it's a snapshot, that would have been a very different situation, but it didn't say that. So again, data that you can't verify, It's just not safe to use.
Yeah, and Carrie, let me jump in. This isn't a slam against Gas Buddy, and they've come a long way trying to update.
Oh yeah,
what they're doing. Yeah, I
I
just
should,
I
I
didn't
should
want anybody to
specify.
think we're bad on Gas Buddy. It's kind of the only data you have sometimes, right? So
Well, yes, this has nothing to do with Gas Buddy, really. The problem was with the facilitator, right? The Gas Buddy data is great, but someone had taken a snapshot of that data, hosted it on ArcGIS Online without providing any information about it. So that's the issue, was that second party that took the data and hosted it, who knows who that was. It could have been a concerned citizen who just wanted to be helpful. I mean, it's hard to say. So yeah, thank you, Tom. This has nothing to do with how reliable Gas Buddy is. Their data is great. So the second question has to do with security. So if the data set is shared through HTTPS, or it has an SSL encryption, you would say yes and move down to the ORL 1 column. And most data sets these days are SSL encrypted. The way to know that is just to see in the URL, does it say HTTPS? If yes, then it passes this test. I have seen some data sets that are not HTTPS, they'll say HTTP, but that's mostly legacy data or outdated data. Most new data is SSL encrypted. The next question has to do with interoperability, and I'm going to actually go into these criteria in more detail in a minute. Interoperability really means that this data can be easily shared. So if it's in a format like a REST service or a shapefile where a GIS professional can quickly incorporate it into their environment, we would say that it's interoperable. And again, I'm going to go through more of those criteria. Next is service availability. So I know that I've run into situations where services have super great information that would be really helpful during a major event, but then when a major event happens, all of the hits on that service cause it to go down. And it takes a while for it to come back up. So we want to take that into consideration when we're assessing these data sets, because if you can't use it during an event, then even if it's great data, is it really going to be that useful? So we try to do some research into data to discover what's the downtime. It could be scheduled downtime for maintenance, or it could be, because of interruptions. And sometimes it does take a little bit of research to find that information. And sometimes it takes reaching out to the data provider. Change notification has to do with some method of notifying users if something changes with the data. Maybe that's new symbology, maybe it's, some of the fields got updated, something like that, where it could have an impact on the user. There needs to be some form of website, graphical interface. I know with NOAA data, there's usually a web interface with their data where you can go there and see if there's updates, but that's not in place for everything. So just some kind of ability to find out if something has changed is important. And then of course, whether or not the data is verified and tested. So Tom mentioned earlier, data that's in development. Basically what that often means is that it's not supported, right? So you're almost in a beta testing phase with the data. If something is wrong or if the service goes down, there's no one there in the office to make sure that it gets back up and running, or they can't verify the output of the data or the analysis that's being performed. So asking whether or not the data is verified and tested is important. And then finally, metadata completeness. So again, looking at our scenario, the metadata was not complete. I didn't know what I was looking at. We have a list of criteria for metadata that we look for when we do this assessment. So again, that's the overview of the ORL model decision tree. So now I just want to go in depth a little bit into some of the criteria so that you kind of get a better understanding of how we arrived at these different thresholds. So first is the trusted and reliable source. So the SICE actually has a list of, what we consider trusted and reliable sources. Sometimes this is a judgment call, or it can be subjective, right? But I think when you know, and when you don't know, you really don't know. And so I would say you can almost use like a gut check with this sometimes, but there is a list of trusted and vetted sources through the SICE that, is a good kind of guideline for making that assessment. And sometimes the question is also, do we even know who the owner is? So again, if you answer no to that, it's time to, set that data set aside and find something else and not concern yourself with ranking it using the ORL model. Next, this gets into the security aspect of the SSL encryption. And this just explains a little bit what that means. Again, if HTTPS is in the URL, that just means that there's a SSL certificate between the connection of the web server and the browser that is protecting that flow of information. So if that's not there, that's a problem, and that could potentially be a security risk. So we say yes to this question if it is SSL encrypted, and no if it's not. So now we come to the question of shareability and interoperability. So again, this has to do with how easily shareable the data is. You know, again, if it's a REST service, if it's a shapefile, a geodatabase, KMZ, any of those GIS data formats, we would say that it's interoperable. If it's a PDF with pictures on it, that's not interoperable. We can't do much with that, or at least not in a rapid time. So we would answer no to that question. But that also applies to some other formats like text files, Excel. You know, if the Excel file has lat long in it, that's different. Again, this is kind of a judgment call type of thing. But I think, you know, when you open something, whether or not it's interoperable. If it's a JPEG, you know, as a GIS professional, there's not a whole lot we can do with that. So this gets into the question of service availability, and our committee actually convened for quite a long time to come up with the criteria and these thresholds. And what we came up with was the service must be available at least 95% of the time. So that can either be the result of downtime for scheduled maintenance or downtime from service interruptions. And there are ways that you can monitor the performance of a service. I've used tools like AlertSite before, which will periodically ping a service to make sure that it's up and running, and it will show you a graph to show when those pings don't go through. But you can also reach out to the data provider and just ask. Sometimes it's in like a data sharing agreement or a license agreement that says, you know, we have to support this data X% of the time. So again, this one takes a little bit of time to research. And as I'll show you in the actual ranking tool, a lot of times if the answer is I don't know, you just answer no and move on. So I can see a lot of the times the answer to this being I don't know. So you either research it or answer no and, you know, maybe come back to it later. Again, verified and tested. This is just saying the data set's not in a development or a testing phase. So metadata completeness, I wanted to go through the different components of metadata that we're looking for. We're looking for latency or temporal resolution. Not all data is going to have both of those things. It really depends on what the data is. But something that tells you, you know, how often is the data being updated, or how often is sensor data being collected in the field, that needs to be there. Spatial resolution, again, if it's points, that's not necessarily going to apply, but if it does apply, it needs to be there. And then some kind of guidance for interpretation. I've seen services that are really good about this, especially from government agencies like NOAA, but they give you a good just verbal description of the data, how to interpret it, how to read the symbology, how to read the different fields. So that's very, very important to have in there. Also, of course, the data source / provider, and if there's a facilitator, that needs to be made clear as well. And then contact information. So I mean, I've seen services that have a link that you can click on to email, you know, their GIS team. I know I've seen that on a lot of NOAA services, and I've used that in the past. So some form of ability to contact the data provider is important as well. And finally, the question of change notification. You know, as I said, some form of graphical web page user interface, or maybe even an email address. You know, you can put your email address in and get updates. Something where if there's a major change made with the service, users are notified. We understand that this is kind of asking a lot from data providers, but you know, I've been in situations where I had a service in an app and they completely changed the symbology, and they didn't put it in a new service. They just updated the existing one, or they overwrote the service. And it was a completely different data set at that point, right? It was showing totally different things. So just being able to be alerted when those changes are happening is really helpful. Okay, so last but not least, I've got a little dashboard here. It's very, very simple, but it's just an example of, I guess it's having me sign in. Okay, one second. Of course. It's never asked me to sign in before. Is that in the, it's in the All Hazards Consortium. That's why. So if you come to our workshop tomorrow, you will see some examples of data sets that are ranked at an ORL 1. The one that I can show, actually, let me do this. Okay. Oh my gosh, go away. Okay, here we go. The data, Tom's laughing at me. The data set that I wanted to show as the perfect example of an ORL 1 is the National Weather Service watches and warnings. And some of you might have seen this service before.
It only happens when you're doing a demonstration, right?
Yep.
Murphy's Law.
It's okay though. So this service is definitely one of my favorites for situational awareness. Basically what it shows is polygons that are at the, I believe, the county level. And if there is an active watch or warning for that county, it's going to show a symbolic color to represent that. So if I expand the legend here, you can see there's a lot of different types of watches and warnings. I've used this in apps before and actually just filtered out the ones that we cared about the most, like flooding. But this service qualifies as an ORL 1 because if you look at the REST service, there's tons of metadata. It gives you a great service description that explains how to interpret all of the data. It gives you a link to contact their IDP GIS team. This is the link I've used before. So it's just a really great example. It's obviously a trusted and vetted source, gives you all that information. So that's kind of my standard example of a really, really good ORL 1 data set. And I've also never once seen this service go down. And I've used it in every single storm event that I've helped support. So that's the example I wanted to show. And last, I wanted to show what our actual ranking tool looks like. And I'm not going to go into this in super great detail right now. Tomorrow during the workshop, which I highly recommend that you attend if you're interested, we're going to actually be going through this as a group, but this is just a simple form. So when you get a data set and you want to rank it really quickly, you just go through this form and you answer all these questions. And what it's going to do is spit out an ORL ranking at the end. So the first couple questions are more for our information. So we want to kind of get a sense for the types of data sets people are ranking, what they're being used for, and some of the keywords. So that's more just for tracking purposes. But here's where the actual ORL questions are. So we've got our trusted and vetted source question, SSL, HTTPS, interoperability or shareability, service availability, etc. And you have the option of providing comments as well. So that is the actual ORL ranking tool. And this is public. So anybody can access this and use it at this time. And also anybody can access this as well. So I'm going to put a link to this story map in the chat in case anyone has an interest in looking at that. But with that, that's all I've got. So I will, I guess, open it up for questions, Tom.
Yeah. So tomorrow, I forget what time. I think it's 4 o'clock. I forget. No, is it 4? I forget. Hang on.
I think it's 1:30, but
we're going to do an actual exercise using the ORL tool that was developed. It's live. We'll give it to you. But the SICE working group wants that to be ubiquitous. Anyone can use it. There's no cost. The idea is to get people sharing the same standard, okay, so that we can share data interoperably, right? Very few people do this. We didn't realize that until we got into data sharing, and we realized this is a problem. I mean, Kent, you and I talked about this. Hey, Kent, here's some data. See if Verizon, the first question you're asking me is, can I make a decision on this, right? I mean, it's kind of important to the operations. Tomorrow, we're going to go through that exercise, and I'll give you the time here if you're not familiar with it. It's going to be at 1:15. It'll be on track 3. And to find out all the tracks, you just go to ahc2021.com, ahc2021.com, and you can get all the links that'll be posted there for session track 1, 2, and 3. Do we have any, I'm just looking at the chat here, if we have any questions or in the question area. Stand by 1 second. One question is, will we be allowed to access the slides after this? Yes, every session's being recorded. It'll be part of the All Access Pass, which is a combination of videos of every session, edited, audio of every session, edited, a transcription of every session, edited, and then kind of a deep dive notes, kind of a cliff notes for each session, all in one kind of bundled package. You can go to ahc2021.com and find out information about that. Is the session tomorrow for GIS techs or operational decision makers? Anybody?
I would say both. So kind of the whole point of that workshop is to allow operational decision makers and GIS techs to work better together. So when we thought about that workshop, kind of our dream was to have GIS professionals and operational decision makers working together. We're going to be doing actually a workshop in, is it March, Tom? A little ways out.
March 4th, 12:30, yeah.
It's going to be kind of an extension on tomorrow's workshop, but it's going to be half day. That's going to be facilitate more of that. So I would say both. We're not going to be getting super technical tomorrow. We're not going to be, expecting things of anyone that I think they would struggle with. So I highly recommend you join regardless.
Yeah, and just to build on that, it'd be great if the GIS techs, the operational decision makers, if you attended together with your GIS tech, if you're an operations person or if you're a GIS person, bring your operational people, because the number one reason why these tools aren't adopted to their potential is those two groups of people are a really hard time communicating with each other and understanding the basic terms and the basic concepts, so that everybody knows what's needed and everybody knows what's possible. So if you can partner up and come to that, I think you find it really useful.
Okay. Another question came in is this currently being used actively now, and how's it working?
We use it within the SICEnet environment. So if you go to information products inside of All Hazard Consortium SICEnet, you'll see it used there. You also will see it used in GeoCollaborate. It's partner by partner trying to get the rest of the community to adopt this approach, which is part of the motivation for this session, is to get the more widespread understanding of it. But we do use it inside of AHC's environment quite a bit.
Very good. And I know, Carrie, I think you've been using it informally or maybe formally at Duke. Maybe you talk about how you're using it there.
Sure. So we actually did a pilot, 2 years ago, I want to say now. It's amazing how much time has flown by, but we did a pilot and found that it was very successful. I think the thing that we got the most out of it was the questioning attitude aspect. So kind of forcing ourselves in the process to slow down and ask questions about the data was very useful. And there were a couple data sets that through going through that process, we determined not to use, that if we hadn't gone through the process, we may have used. So for me as a GIS professional, that was the biggest win. And I know that sort of downstream of us, some of the decision makers found it useful as well once they understood what it was. I think for industry adoption, as with many things like this, we really need to kind of get groups like this on board for it to become sort of culturalized, I guess, or getting people socialized to use it, which is something that, you know, I've been working on my end, and I know Chris and others have been working on their end. So it's more of a cultural shift, I think, that needs to happen.
Okay. We've got a few minutes left. Part of the process here is to bridge this gap between operational decision makers and GIS communities, right? Because they both do good work, but it's kind of how do they come together and create a standard that they can communicate back and forth on. And Chris, you've worked with Dominion on that quite a bit, Dominion Energy. And you're working on the SICE-Net initiative, which I think we have a short video here at the end if we have time. Maybe you can talk about how you see that helping them, if you will, within their ops centers. I know they've done a lot of work modernizing their ops centers and using GIS to help bring that to life. Maybe talk about that for just a minute.
Yes, they're kind of a great use case, a great example of the art of the possible. You know, the power being out is the true emergency often, not necessarily what caused it, but a power outage is in itself a crisis for people, you know, at the individual homeowner level or at the individual resident level. So they strive to use the best data as fast as they can to make really informed decisions to recover from power outage incidents and other types of incidents as quickly as possible. So that means really dipping their cup into that ocean of data services that are out there and really understanding what they're looking at, so that they're able to make really informed decisions that have massive financial implications as well as time implications on the effectiveness of the response. So they really need to know what they're looking at, but they also really need to use as much data as they can to drive those decisions. So that balance is kind of where things like this come in. It's helping them navigate. That we know let's say they're using a crowdsourced data to detect power wires down. That's crowdsourced, so it's got to be identified as crowdsourced. It's it's not coming from an authoritative source. It's not coming from a government system. It's not coming from a commercial vendor with some sort of service level agreement on the data. It's coming from the public, but it's super important. It may be an ORL 4, and they all know that, but it's very useful to them. This world of web services is allowing organizations like them to share information like never before, public and private, government organizations sharing with private sector and vice versa. As this web of information sharing partners being facilitated by the All Hazards Consortium is coming together, the trust framework that is built upon in part is dependent upon understanding what people are sharing and how they're sharing and the reliability of what they're sharing. So the technologies have all come together. They're allow us to do things that we never could before for places like Dominion, and the governance structure that goes along with that of the ORLs is evolving at the same time to keep up with what they can now do that they couldn't do a few years ago.
Very good, very good. Ken, maybe you could provide comment. We've mentioned the SICE-Net initiative, right? How using the SICE, we can focus on a specific use case and have states and companies share information privately, securely, if you will. Maybe from the Verizon perspective, how do you see that helping industry coordinate either damage assessment or other types of things? Maybe you could speak to that for a minute, knowing the ORL standards will be part of that whole network.
Sure. So a couple of thoughts, Tom. First, for many of us, it's a one-to-many relationship. There's, one of us and many people we need to coordinate with during a response. And I know that we in everyone else in the business continuity and emergency management field are always looking for ways to operate as efficiently and effectively as possible. We don't have extremely large teams in most cases. And so being able to share information between industries or between companies within the industry in a very controlled and controlled manner, where you get to choose who sees the information, how long they can see it for, and what they see, gives us the ability to accelerate information sharing and the ability to respond without a huge investment in human capital. We just don't have as much as we like to have a liaison in every one of our peer organizations, EOCs and both public and private sector. We just don't have the resources to do this. So this gives us the ability to coordinate with a lot of different people very quickly and very efficiently during a time of crisis. So huge potential here, and I think we'll see it as a growing way to collaborate and share information in a secure way. Tom?
Very good. Yeah, thank you. So just up on the screen real quick, I want to remind everybody that we will be having a virtual workshop on this exact topic for several hours, a deeper dive on March 4th. So mark your calendars, March 4th. We'll send out an invitation to everybody, but mark your calendars, March 4th. We're going to take that period of time and really get into the story map that Carrie's produced, but actually get deeper into an exercise hands-on. It'll be virtual, but we want to use that as an opportunity to dive in and show you how to use it for your organization and get your feedback so we can enhance it. This is a constant state of evolution. So that was kind of the first thing. The second thing is our next session is going to begin at 4:55 in about 3 minutes. And if you want to stay on this track, don't do anything. We've got Trip Hardy coming up from, has fantastic brief on some new technology that I think is going to help the cyber community quite a bit. In track 1, okay, Persia Payne Hurley and Molly Doherty are going to be talking about how they run their state private sector efforts within their states to help private sector solve issues and how they can help states solve issues. So we'll take a break now. We may have a video. I'm not sure we got it queued up yet, but if we do, that's fine. Let me thank all of our panelists, Chris, Carrie, Kent. I know these folks talk every Friday with me on a number of use cases. So we're glad to be bringing this out to you all. So panelists, thank you. And if you're going to stay on the track, don't do a thing. If you want to switch, go to ahc2021.com and you can select the track you want to go to. Okay. Thank you all. And that'll conclude this session. We'll start our next session in about 2 minutes.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone.